All right, everybody. Welcome to another truly exciting episode of Untapped. And I'm really excited for today. And of course, I'm sitting here with Lauren Weinstein and we have Annie Riley with us. And the topic for today is how to manage yourself before managing others, which is a really interesting topic. And one that begs to the question of, have you ever been disappointed when you feel like you're communicating really well and you have a really good intention with other people? It could be your boss or people at work, but you're just not getting the feedback that you want and you feel disappointed or frustrated that you think that you're doing everything correctly, but it's just not coming back in a way that is efficient, that is joyful, that is productive. I think we all have felt that way. And Annie has spent her career helping managers, leaders, and normal people as well understand that it isn't always about what's going on in the other. It's actually a lot what's going on within each one of us that determines the outcomes that we're getting. So we're really excited about this because we're going to dive into some practices and ideas for how we can really start to understand what's going on within us that will enable us to have better results and outcomes in our lives and our work with other people. And Annie is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Fortlight. And she does group coaching programs for leaders and particularly startup leaders. But she started her career in management consulting and she worked for a big startup called HotelTonight, which I know she was the 9th employee, so was there really early. And she led operations in North America and has had a really interesting career managing a lot of people. And she hosts a podcast called Who Got Me Here, which we'll give the link to as well. And it's all about networking. And she's a graduate of Harvard and Stanford. And Lauren, every time we bring on these people that are Harvard and Stanford, I feel so dumb because I didn't go there, but it's okay. I'm getting over that myself. But Annie, I just want to invite you in. I'm really excited for this conversation. And it's just really great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I have had the pleasure of joining a couple of the other conversations that you've had and listening in. And it's always such interesting and useful stuff. So I'm a huge fan of what you and Lauren are doing and just thrilled to be part of it.
Thank you. Well, so happy to have you here. This is such an important topic. By far, one of the biggest unlocks for me personally was just this idea, what seems like an outer challenge at work or with a partner really is an inner one. And as we do the inner work, everything then changes around us. I have a friend that likes to say, how you've changed since I've changed. Right? Once we change ourselves, it seems like the other person's changed or we're just orienting differently to the world. So what's the beautiful gift of that is we do have control over ourselves, not other people. So we take what's in our control, how we think about things and say things and our mindset. And then all of a sudden that shifts our behavior and others. So happy to have Annie here. I've known each other for almost a year now. She's completely delightful and insightful. Such a gift to have her here. So first question, would love to hear, how did you get this aha moment, right? Because normally we think, oh no, it's the other person, or I need to learn this framework, but it goes much deeper than that. What was your aha moment? What's your story?
Yeah, and actually, so when I first started working on this group coaching program, I did not have any aspirations to be a coach. I was not even thinking about working in this world. But it really was my own experience growing up in the startup world and going through this very process of self-discovery that has motivated me to work on this and over time to make it more and more of my core priority, my mission at work. So it's been this side project that has escalated over the years. My background is that when I was at HotelTonight, I was coming up through the ranks, having what a lot of people think of as the very desirable startup experience. You join as an early employee, you prove yourself, and then as the company grows, there's just more and more to do. And so more and more responsibility gets thrown at you. And there was a lot that was really great about that. The learning curve was super steep. I got to have what I feel is a huge impact on the company that I'm really proud of. It's one of the career highlights today. But as I was going through that experience, one, we were moving at such a fast pace. There really wasn't a lot of time to pause and slow down and learn and reflect and say, am I actually doing this the right way? There's a lot of uncertainty that kind of came with that. And there wasn't a lot of time with role models. My manager was terrific, but he was also a co-founder and COO of the company. He didn't have a lot of time to spend with me, to coach me and develop me. It really was throwing things my way and saying, okay, you go figure this out. And so I hit a point where I realized I need some help. I need some support. A lot of people might know this feeling well, that as you get more and more responsibility in an organization and you're trying to show what you can do, it can be very lonely. So at a minimum, I think I was seeking some support, but also I knew that I needed to upskill at a much faster rate to be able to continue on my trajectory. And so I had a friend, Ben Nelman, who had a coach named Anna Maria. And one day he and I were just out to lunch in Palo Alto. And he said to me, I was telling him about some of my challenges because I personally found it more safe, more comfortable to speak to people outside of the company about some of the struggles that I was dealing with. And he said, I've got this coach. She's amazing. Maybe you should try to work with her. And I brought that to my boss. And I was honestly prepared to, I think, fund this on my own. That's how much I really wanted help and wanted support. But I was very fortunate that he said that I could work with Anna Maria and the company would sponsor that as an investment in me and in my development. And that relationship with Anna Maria really, really changed my life. Not just the way that I worked and the skills that I have, but really it changed how I live. She's been one of the most influential people in my entire life. And I think an aha moment that I had so many aha moments with her, countless. But I think one of the big ones was I got some feedback, and this actually speaks to what you were saying in the intro, Todd. I got some feedback from someone on my team that they were reluctant to give me feedback. And specifically, they were reluctant to give me critical feedback because they worried that if they gave me critical feedback, I would be defensive and I might even retaliate in some way. I might hold it against them in some way. And I remember she did 360 and she conveyed this feedback to me in a conversation. And I remember putting my head on the desk and just crying. I felt so defeated, frustrated, because to the point that you made, Todd, that is not at all what my intention was with my team. And actually, I held it as part of my identity, part of my values, that I wanted to be someone and that I am someone you can be straight with. You could tell me like it is. I can handle it. I actually prefer that. And so to hear that someone on my team actually felt the opposite was in the moment super devastating to me. And it just felt catastrophic. And I think going through the experience with Anna Maria, I remember my head was on the desk and she said, and I said, everybody hates me. Everybody thinks I can't take feedback. And she said, well, some people said that sometimes they're reluctant to give you feedback. And she helped me de-escalate it in my mind to get it to a place where I could work with it. I could hold it. I could coexist with it where it wasn't so overwhelming. It didn't feel so defensive. And I think that was one of the first times that I realized how my own thinking, my own mindset, which at the time I think was, and I still battle with some of these things, but at the time it was even more sort of perfectionistic, catastrophizing the negative feedback, really just like wanting to hard charge and do really well. I knew how those beliefs, that mindset was helping me. It had gotten me to where I was at that point, but it wasn't going to be all that I needed, right? Like in some ways it was hurting me or limiting me because I couldn't even hear this piece of feedback from someone on my team, right? So I think that was just a big eye opener for me that, oh, it's actually like the phone call is coming from inside the house. It's my own beliefs, my own mindset that although it has served me so well, it's actually really in my way. And that kind of started this whole process of really just getting more resilient, getting more accurate, building a whole toolkit about how I was approaching problems. And ultimately, that was the big unlock for me in my interpersonal choices. But I had to get to that place internally before I could be better with the people on my team. Because if you had said to me, go take this template and run with it, might have been the best template in the world, but I didn't have the inner sort of resilience and toolkit to really make the most of it. So that was my sort of first exposure to this that set me on the path that really changed a lot for me.
Yeah. And I think what you're sharing really resonates with us and also with a lot of the people that we've coached for all these years, where oftentimes we employ these strategies to get the success that we want, which you clearly did. And oftentimes it's a very black and white thinking. Like, I need to do this. It's very like determined and focused energy, right? Then we get to a point, it's very common. We get to this point where we start to realize, wow, we're not really as happy and we're a little bit more overwhelmed than we thought we would be. And then for you, you heard one piece of feedback that somebody was uncomfortable sharing some feedback with you, which isn't black or white. It's actually a little bit more gray. And we start to find out that actually reality is a little more gray than we like to often realize. Then that started you down a path of self-discovery where you really first started to understand, wow, this is really going on here within me. And I love that you had a coach and you got the help that you needed, which, by the way, is so important, right? So important, because when we're only here in our head by ourselves, we can really only do so much. We really do need the feedback and the help of others. And when you put your hand up and say, hey, I need help, this is actually where you get the more enlightened experiences and ideas that you have. But I want to ask you, so continuing on, so you started to have this first mindset shift, like, wow, okay, like this is all really going on here. And you had a great coach to help you with this. How did you start to navigate this process, this understanding that everything that was going on the outside with your employees and your colleagues and your coworkers, they were giving you feedback and it was making you feel a certain way or experience a certain way and broke you down for a moment? How did you start to navigate that process? And how did things start to change? Like, what did you employ to actually change to connect more deeply with others as you were starting to wake up to this new reality?
This is where I think it looks different for each person, and it was bit by bit over time. So I think sometimes when I myself read things or listen to podcasts and I'm looking for answers, I love a silver bullet where people say the one thing that I did that changed the game is, and spoiler alert, there was not one thing for me, but I think it was building a consistent practice over time of looking at things, noticing the stories that were coming up in my head, noticing the emotions that were coming up around things, and being open and willing to rewrite that story a little bit and to take a very experimental mindset around this. To your point, Todd, around I had very black and white thinking for a lot of my life. And I think it helped me in a lot of ways, but it was embracing that gray of, hey, there is going to be no silver bullet here. And it's going to be this kind of test and learn and incorporate this mindset, incorporate that tool, try this thing, didn't really work here, try something else. So I just preface this with, sadly, for me and for everyone, there is no silver bullet here. But I think the consistent practice was really helpful. And then in my work with Anna Maria, something else that was really, really essential was this ability to put on we called it rose-colored glasses to interpret things differently. I mentioned that I got this piece of feedback from someone on my team. I was really upset about it. And I noticed that I had a pattern around really jumping to the most self-critical, catastrophic answer that there could possibly be. And in some ways, that was really keeping me stuck, right? Because when something is so big and so negative, there's not much you can really do with that. And so one of my favorite tools that I worked on with her was this idea, and I'm a very visual person. So it was almost like putting on this pair of rose-colored, sparkly glasses and looking at the exact same situation, but giving it the most positive, the most generous possible interpretation. And so from there, and then is there a version of that you can believe? Even a little bit. And then is there something that you can work with from there? So little tools like that I could learn, and then I could put it to practice. And then again, that consistency. How did that go for me? What worked about it? What didn't work? Because again, I think especially in many of the high performing cultures we work in, we're so solutions oriented and we're trained to say, yes, this thing worked. Great. Now it's in my toolkit. I will apply it all the time, move on. And in reality, these types of the inner work we're talking about, the interpersonal choices that we're talking about, sometimes they apply, sometimes they don't. So I had this image of myself building, we called it my manager backpack. Again, I don't know why I come up with these like metaphors for things and they stick for me. And so I go with them. But I think it's whatever version of that works for you, right? But for me, it was my manager backpack. And in there was the rose-colored glasses. And in there was being aware of feelings and being able to name my emotions. And in there was a whole bunch of other things that I collected along the way. And so when I'm in a conversation, if that overwhelm comes, if the black and white thinking comes, if I get stuck, then I've got my back. It's always with me. But I can pull out whatever tool is going to be most helpful and just give it a try, right? Not expect it to save me or be the perfect solution, but be willing to try and then do the thinking of how did it work? How did it go? Where can I use this in the future? Where does it not apply? I think that last piece, that reflection piece, we don't tend to like to do because we think of it as slow. We think of it as interrupting our progress. But for me, that was really, really critical.
I love that so much because I think we do want like the silver bullet, the quick fix. This is going to work immediately. But everything I've learned is it takes time, right? It's like you really are collecting all these tools and you have them in your arsenal and you practice them over time. And then eventually they're second nature. So what took you weeks to work through takes hours and then minutes. But it really is a journey. And so I think it's so important for people to know that. And but that's also the gift of it. Because anywhere you can get one aha moment, one insight, and you're like, oh, that's good. Let me use it and make a note and then try it out and keep practicing. And then all of a sudden, a year later, you have so many tools. 2 years later, so many tools. And life just becomes so much easier and life is long. So you have like 2 years is nothing in the grand scheme of having a more amazing work life or romantic life. So
yeah, totally. It's all in your backpack suddenly becomes many slides. And I think for me that I just really like that visual. And so if there's something that make a note of it, or if building your toolkit, whatever sort of the concept is that resonates for you, that's going to stick for you. I think even if it's silly, I would say just go with it. Because for me, I would be reading something or in a conversation and be like, that's cool. I'm going to put it in my backpack. I would even sometimes just think about what are all the things I feel stuck? What's in my backpack? What can I pull out here? Almost like I'm on a hike, I'm on a journey, and I literally need these supplies. I think whatever version of that is helpful, people should just go with, because what matters is that it works for you. And actually, one thing I wanted to mention, Lauren, along the lines of what you're describing is we love to think of progress as linear. And one thing Anna Maria taught me, she often talks about learning as a spiral. Because over the course of working with her, and actually even beyond, because she and I eventually stopped working together one-on-one, sometimes the same problems, the same challenges would come up, but just take different shapes, different forms, or it'd be a different version of the same challenge. And it's not that I should have conquered this and left it in the past, and it might feel similar, but actually I'm going deeper on the problem. We're like digging in farther, like a drill spiraling
100%.
into it. And I thought that was a really cool way to think about it too, so that when something comes up again and again, I'm not exasperated, self-critical. Oh, here it is again. I'm just drilling into a different level of this challenge. I'm learning the next thing I need to learn about it.
100%. Actually, it's so wise. And I think just as a listener, if you're listening to this, do you ever deal with the same problems again and again? You ever deal with it even though you thought that you already solved that problem? We're all wired to deal with these problems again and again, right? And so I love that mindset shift is really important, because then it relieves us and it actually helps us understand that our work is to actually go deeper and uncover more of ourselves. And that's the freedom where we can actually start to really see ourselves better, become more self-aware, and use these tools that you're putting in your backpack to actually unpack them more and more. So it's very relevant. And I just got to say, I love the idea when you said before around the silver bullet, that there is no silver bullet. I think the awareness that there is no silver bullet is the silver bullet, right? That is actually the relief that we need. So that way we allow ourselves to relax into the long game. We're so focused, especially in the professional world, of the short game, like what needs to happen now. But as humans, we thrive playing the long game. And I think that's part of the balance that you're bringing to your clients, is this ability to actually like be a human and actually understand that like it takes time to self-reflect and do some of these tools that we're going to dive into right now. And that's okay, even as we're working in the professional environment, right? So I want to talk about some of the tools, right? So you mentioned the rose-colored glasses, which, as you may know, Lauren and I work pretty closely with these Japanese samurai masters. And
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan.
okay, and a lot of what they teach really is looking at everything and anything as an opportunity as opposed to a threat. It's actually a core part of their lineage and their teaching, which I think is similar to being able to wear rose-colored glasses in a situation. Talk to us about that technique, right? Like, how was that for you to all of a sudden, instead of going to catastrophic thinking and thinking, oh, the world's going to end, like when you, and also when you teach this, like, how do you help people? What is your way of helping people see the positive and to actually start to act in a way that's in accordance with that? And then what results typically happen when we start to do this, use this tool?
Yeah. And just a quick note on the samurai, because I am a huge fan. Lauren led a workshop that I was a part of with them. And I think it was like 20 women, leaders in tech in the audience. And they said, you either win or you lose. And the whole audience screamed, lose. And obviously that's the wrong answer. The answer was you win or you learn. And I think, but I just bring that up to say this idea of win or lose, right? This sort of like wiring for the negative. You're right. It's so ingrained. And I think especially I work with people in the startup world, so especially for them, but honestly for folks in all industries and all types of roles, this idea of a learning process is so huge. In my experience for myself and also working with the many managers I worked with, it's not gonna stick if you can't believe a version of it. I was just talking to somebody about the rose-colored glasses very recently. I said, okay, let's put them on. What is the most positive, generous interpretation you could come up with for what your colleague's behavior is? We're unpacking a difficult situation she had at work. And she had a really hard time coming up with something. So we built this menu of possibilities, and then we looked at it together. And she was in such a stuck negative place that she was like, I can't believe any of this. And I think there's a version of this where she could have just said to me, I guess we'll go with number 2. He really cares about me and wants me to grow. And that's why he gave me that critical feedback. And she could have just gone through the motions. But I think that's also where people get a little stuck, is they're trying to do the process right instead of coming up with something that really resonates and rings true. So we rework the options to come up with, even if it's small, even if it's tiny, even if it's silly, what's the sort of version of this that you can believe, or a part of you, one voice in your mind can believe. And then that gives us a thread to pull on. And that gives us more agency and more choices, right? When we think about what are the interpersonal decisions we could make here? What do we want to say to that colleague? How do we want to handle this? What would our ideal outcome be? All of that we want to jump to because it feels good and it feels like the solution. But really, we had to stop in this place of, what is the positive interpretation that you can actually get behind here as the kind of gateway to get to those solutions? Otherwise, you're going to move forward in a way where it's not real, it's inauthentic, and it's not going to stick, and you're not going to make progress. Or you're going to stay so dug in and stuck on your own story that you also won't make progress. So I think it's just like finding these little threads of things you can believe and going out and testing and learning by pulling those.
I can't tell you how powerful this is, right? And this is a practice that I've really employed in my life, as Laura knows, because we talk about it all the time. But like, even as you're listening to this and you're in a difficult situation or you have a challenging relationship with somebody, if we don't have the possibility in our minds or a visualization where there could be a positive result, we're not going to get one. It's just not going to magically happen. So the work here really is to slow down and actually start to use our imagination, right? Because sometimes, like you said, it was difficult for her to even come up with one. And you had to coach her to actually come up with one. And so sometimes it feels a little bit like fake it till you make it. But that's not also good enough from what I'm hearing from you, right? It actually has to be something that you could believe in. I love that nuance that you add into it, which is you have to find something that a part of you could believe that that's a possibility. And then from there, we follow that thread. And that's where you've seen a lot of people get better results in the relationships at work, and dealing with other people, where you start them there and they focus on it. What's the next step in that, right? So then you have them believe, that there's a possibility there. Then they go out and test it, you said, I believe. So can you give me an example of or what you mean about how to actually go through this process?
Yeah, I think I would point to a slightly different example because, that one that I just mentioned is still very much, we just kind of got to step one, I would say. But the way that someone might go through something like this, for example, I worked with another manager who really wanted to delegate more. She had this goal around delegation, around empowering her team. And when we kind of dug into her thoughts, her behaviors, what she was actually doing, actually thinking, we realized that she was kind of meddling and staying very involved because of some fears and worries that were driving her behavior. She thought, if I'm not in every meeting, then my team won't feel supported by me. A good manager shows up for their team. That's sort of a rule that she was living by. Or, if I don't get involved in these things, then it's not going to work that well. And then, we won't hit our results. And then, I'll be in trouble, right? So this sort of need for control. And so it was sort of thinking about, okay, what's your goal? What is the thing that you want to accomplish? How are you actually getting in your own way by things that you're thinking? What are rules that you're living by? Because you read them in a book or somebody told you, but they might not apply here. And then what can you do to explore not just how those rules are helping you, because, right, you do them for a reason. You're a rational person, but also how might living that way be limiting you, hurting you? What might it be costing you, right? So in this example, she's wanting to help her team, wanting to show up, but on the flip side, maybe they're wanting to do some of the things that she's taking on. And when she's in the meeting, they can't step up to take that responsibility, or she's blocking them from that learning opportunity. Maybe they're actually frustrated that she's in every meeting. And so what I loved about this was we were in a coaching session, a group coaching session, and we said, how could you sort of test this, right? How could you test out how real this is, where it does and doesn't apply, and whether, a change might be available to you. There might be another possibility. And she said, well, I have 3 meetings this afternoon with my direct reports. I could just not go. And that, as she said it, you could sort of feel like in her voice, right? Like it felt like a big, scary thing to just cancel, because her mindset that she had been living by all these years was that the direct reports would feel abandoned, that the meeting will go off the rails without her. She'll lose control, all of these negative consequences. So we hung up, and she, told the group, hey, I just told my team I'm not coming to any of those meetings. And then for the afternoon, it was, am I okay? How does this feel? This is new. This is uncomfortable. Is everything going off the rails? And then a piece that I think a lot of people miss is the next day, she asked her team how that was for them. Hey, when I canceled those meetings, how did you interpret it? How did that make you feel? And she heard from them that one person didn't think anything of it. Oh, I just figured you were busy. You're the manager. You have a lot of stuff going on. Another person was like, actually, I really appreciate it because I got to step up to lead the meeting. And that's been something I've been wanting to do. Right. So she got all this data that the big, bad, scary didn't actually happen. And in fact, the reactions and the consequences were, worst case neutral and best case really, really positive. And so it's all about kind of like filing that data away and updating, our internal algorithm for how we then go about making decisions in the future. So for her, she's like, when she thinks about, do I need to be in this meeting? It's not just how can I give this away to somebody on my team, but it's what do I think is going to happen and how real and accurate is that? And actually, it's probably safer than I think. So then the next time she can, opt out of a bigger meeting or hand over a bigger project, kind of escalate it little by little over time. And so I really think that this approach of looking at our mindset, seeing how it's helping us, keeping us safe, protecting us, because again, we're rational or probably have it for a reason, but also the shadow side of how it's hurting us, how it's limiting us, what it might be costing us. And then running these little experiments, not to make progress on it necessarily, but to use that as information to rewire our thinking around this. And this is rooted in the theory of adult development from Lisa Leahy and Bob Keegan out of Harvard Ed School. And I just think it's extremely powerful for really anyone trying to do anything in the world, leadership or otherwise.
I love this because you're really giving us a system and a process for transformation in any situation in our life, right? Because how we work is we have rules, we have thoughts. If I give feedback or share my true feelings, people will get upset. If I don't show up to every meeting, people will not feel supported. Like we don't even realize we have them. They're so ingrained and so subconscious. I need to be perfect, right? That's a rule that we then live by. And a lot of these rules can be very stressful. The rule creates an emotion, worried, fear, anxiety, which creates behavior that leads to suboptimal results. We're burned out. We're not sharing our true feelings. Things are unbalanced. But it's really hard to catch our thoughts, right? Because again, we take them as truth. So I love, pointing to whenever we feel unbalanced, I call them your emotions, your check engine light, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like emotions, like something's out. What's going on? What's out of balance right now? Wow, I feel really burned out at every meeting and I don't have time for other work, or I'm sitting on these feelings and not sharing them. Like let your emotion guide you to say, well, what's the thought that I'm having? I'm thinking that people feel supported. And then I love what you're giving us. So the emotion you catch, you tell yourself the thought. What's a behavior? How could I test if this thought is actually true in a way like safe, low risk? That's, I think, the work that you're speaking to from Harvard Ed is around like, what's a safe bet I can play at one low stakes meeting? I'll say how I feel, but then then I'll ask the other person for feedback. How did that land for you? Was that okay? Let me check in. You're really learning. And even if it didn't go well, if we really missed you, well, it's not any meeting. Maybe it's certain kinds of meetings.
Exactly.
We have to fine tune this discovery process.
Yep. Exactly. I love the check engine light and the immunity to change. If you want to kind of learn more and explore more about this, they have a book called Immunity to Change. And in that, they talk about how we might have one foot on the gas for where we want to go. Be a better delegator, whatever goal you have in life. But because these beliefs, these mindsets, these rules are lurking beneath the surface, we also have even maybe unconsciously a foot on the gas. Or a foot on the brake, excuse me. So we have one foot on the gas with where we want to go. And then we have one foot sort of subconsciously on the brake with these beliefs playing a role, but in a way where we don't give them life, we don't test them, right? They sort of have a hold of us. And as a result, no matter how hard you push on that gas, if you have a foot on the brake as well, you're going to stay stuck, or you're certainly not going to go as far as fast as you want. And so I really like that kind of analogy too. Like for me, the check engine light is when I feel stuck, when I'm saying to myself, I should do this, or I can't do that. It's sort of like these rules are taking over. And I'm not operating from a place of freedom, agency, choice.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Have you any get people to engage in this process where it feels as if we don't have the time, or all of a sudden I need to create a hypothesis and start testing things without being attached to an outcome, and then I need to get self-reflection? Because as Lauren just said, what you're proposing here is a system of gathering information and making better decisions that I'm guessing you're going to say is actually going to move you faster, probably in the short and long term. And by the way, this doesn't only apply to work. This applies to virtually every area of our lives, which we can also talk about. But I'm wondering, how do you get people to engage? Because you came to it through pain. All right, pain, suffering, I'm done, I'm getting feedback. And a lot of us will only come to a different way of thinking about something when we've had enough pain and frustration in a certain area, which is just human nature. But we're also at a different place just in our world right now, where I think people are looking for ways to better themselves. So how do you motivate them to actually do this work, which can seem a little bit more time consuming and intensive to actually do this process, where they don't feel like they have the time to do it? Like, what do you say to that when someone's like, I don't have time for this, I need to get a solution? How do you
Yeah, I love
that
this point, because everybody I work with is extremely busy. And I would say everybody on this call and likely everybody listening to this is probably someone with a lot going on at work, especially managers have long to-do lists of maybe even just big picture things, not even things you can just sort of check off in a, way that feels easy, but big projects. People have personal family responsibilities, things they want to get done for themselves. And I think the key here is to not see this as some extra thing you need to do, and really to integrate it into what you are already doing. And so, when someone comes to my program and we actually go over this and we give as homework, we've come up with sort of one way that you might have a limiting belief, you have a hypothesis around how you might be in your own way. The homework is go run a test of that assumption that you're carrying around. And there are times where a week later, people come back many times and they say, I just didn't have time to do it. And that's what I love about the example that I gave, where the manager just canceled a meeting, right? And that was it. That was that, and the reflection and the checking in. I think maybe all in what she spent 10, 15 minutes max, right, on this whole thing. And it led to this unlock for her. I think if she had turned it into some separate thing that she had to do and had to manufacture, she could have been one of those people that showed up the next week and said, hey, I didn't get it done. But instead, she picked something that was already integrated into her work, into her life, into things that were already planned, already happening, and did it in a safe, Lauren, you brought up that, a safe and lightweight way. And that is the key to success. I think for me, I've had to learn that the hard way, because I mentioned before, I have a strong perfectionist thread. And so I will say, I'm going to build a self-reflection practice. I'm going to carve out an hour a week. And then I'm going to do my coaching. And then I'm going to read every morning. And it's like, no, enough. I'm not going to do all of that. And what ends up happening is, because I've created this perfectionist fantasy in my mind about what good looks like, I end up doing nothing and I end up staying stuck. And then the cycle continues, right? Because then I'm disappointed and frustrated in myself. So I think you set it up for success by making it super safe, super lightweight. And I heard someone refer to them once as giggle goals, which I thought was kind of funny. Like, it should be so small and seems so insignificant to your perfectionist brain that like it actually makes you giggle at how silly it is. Like, if you think it's that ridiculous, that it's that small, you've hit the nail on the head. Like, that's the thing to go with. And then you just collect the information and you iterate, back to Lauren's point that you made earlier. It's not thinking of it as one and done. Now I'm perfect at this thing. Now I'm done. Now I've learned it. Like, okay, how do I escalate this a little more? What's the next version of what's safe and lightweight for me? And on and on and on we go. And back to what you said, Todd, making a comfy, cozy home in this process. I host dinners for managers. And last night we had one here in New York, and a woman brought up the fact that, she's at this startup, it's really chaotic, and she doesn't have time to like make the perfect playbooks to hand off to her team. She's a sales manager, and she's like, I really want to like write the perfect script and make the perfect playbook and hire people and train them, and I just don't have time. And so she asked the group, how do you find time for this? And we went through 1, 2, 3, 4 solutions, pieces of advice. And another gentleman who's a growth manager at another startup said to her, have you ever thought about just getting comfortable with the idea that it might not get done in the way that you want? And it was just like a hush fell over the room, because on the one hand, it's a frustrating answer, but on the other hand, he's so right. Like, she was kind of building this up in her mind for what she wanted to accomplish. And, she would have been so much better off just sort of saying, yeah, I'm going to make progress on this, and it's probably not going to get done in the way that I want it to. And I'm probably not going to tie a bow around it. And, that's the nature of being at a scaling company. That's the nature of being a human in the world. Like, that's the journey, I guess. So, So yeah, it's sort of making that piece very comfortable. But I know we need to move on, but you also said, how do we motivate people? I think that piece, you can't. I think that people have to have the motivation. And then we can, as coaches, as friends, as colleagues, help people get there. And, one thing I've learned the hard way is no one's coming to save us on this stuff. We've got to be willing to do that hard work, make it safe, make it lightweight, honestly, make it fun too. Like, I'm a big believer in making things fun, because if it's not, you're probably not going to want to do it. But no one's going to come do it for us. So I do think that we each have to have that kernel of motivation, whether it's, coming from a place of strength or coming from a place of pain. And then from there, we can help each other and, iterate on the process. But I do think we all need to have that for ourselves.
You said you just dropped so many gems, which I love. But I mean, one, just that small step piece, it's the same as the silver bullet, right? It's actually not the big actions really that make the difference. It's really the small ones that add up over time. I said that in my TED Talk. It's like each new thought, each new action builds on the one before it. But then one day you find yourself in a new reality, right? One thought won't change your life. It could, but it's really the thought and then the action and then the thought, right? You're really building. And then all of a sudden, again, 6 months, a year later, it's a profound difference. So that's something we can often take for granted. So a lot of these shifts are so important. I'm curious, we've talked a lot about ourselves, right? So I need to delegate. I could delegate more, or I could receive feedback better. What about it when it's someone else that's challenging you on a team? Like, how do you think about that? Someone feels like they're underperforming or really challenging you at work. How would you coach someone around that? Yeah.
I would still, and this is maybe controversial, but we still start from ourselves. Because, if there's something going on interpersonally, often where we get stuck or where we restrict ourselves is in our own mind. So again, another dinner I had in San Francisco, there was a manager there who had an employee who wasn't performing. This is something that many of us have dealt with. This is not unique or special. And she was debating, have we given it enough time? Is there something more that I can do? And as we talked through it, she had this belief that if the person didn't succeed in the role, it would mean that she failed them as their manager. And that would mean that she's not a good manager. And so it was almost like in her mind, the person had to win, had to be a fit for this role, she had to make it work, because it wasn't about the other person. It was about what it meant about her as the leader if the person couldn't do it. And so, I think it's important to start with, even if it's about this person is doing this thing, I don't like it. I don't like how I'm getting treated. This person's not performing in the way that I want. I set these expectations. This person isn't meeting them in the way that I want. The first place to look in all of those examples, I think, is at ourselves and what we've done and to contribute to that situation potentially. Have we been clear with our expectations? Have we let this thing go on too long? What's driving that? And then, to kind of go from there. So I do think that the internal work is, at least in my experience, still the first step, even in those interpersonal challenges.
I just love that. I mean, I think that's why you're having such an effect, because it's what Lauren and I would call the deeper work, the true work, is that it really is our own perceptions forming our reality. As humbling and radical as that may sound, it tends to be the case. And then when we look at other people, they have their own universe going on, their own reasons that most of which we don't know about. And this applies to our interpersonal relationships too, right? We apply our own perception onto them, and that's where we lose that curiosity. So the work always comes back to ourselves. And I got to say, I love the piece that you add in. When we look at your process, it's not, well, first off, like understanding that there's, some kind of problem, and then going to this idea of visualizing with rose-colored glasses, like that there could be a different way of looking at this, which is good. And then going out and testing it and having hypotheses, actually putting it out there, small ones, giggle ones. I love that, right? Like little ones that you can kind of laugh at just to test it out. But it's also that last piece that I think is a superpower that kind of gets not talked about as much, which is getting the feedback. around the hypotheses. And you can think about this as you're listening to, playing with your interpersonal dynamics, playing with, doing hypotheses at work. But that last piece seems really important to me. And I'm wondering how you coach people in terms of getting that important feedback, because that's really where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? Like when you're actually getting feedback, because that then gives us data about which we know if we can be more effective and more connected with others in our lives. So how did you come up with that piece, and then how do you coach that piece to it?
Mm-hmm. Two important things here. One, you've already said it, Todd, curiosity. And then that drives inquiry. And I think that those are two things that I had to learn through my work with Anna Maria and just, from experience. But I think it's so important. What can you get curious about the situation, about what the other person might be going through, about what might be driving or motivating their behaviors, about what might be possible. I think if we can shift our state to a place of curiosity, again, back to that first example I shared, that feels genuine, that feels authentic, even if it's small, is there one thread that you can pull on and then operate from that place, which often will then lead to inquiry, right? When we're talking about challenges with other people. And inquiry, genuine, curious inquiry is, in my opinion, the best way to get high quality feedback that you're describing. Really quick, I had a manager once who would say to me, "Do you have any feedback for me?" at the end of our one-on-ones. So we'd meet like every other week for a one-on-one. And the last 2 minutes, he would say, "Hey, do you have any feedback for me?" And that's a great example of, a sort of low quality feedback question, because the bar that I had to clear in the last 2 minutes on a yes, no question, right, was so high for him to get anything real or rich from me. And so I think as a leader, if we can shift to, okay, what is something I think I genuinely want to know about this situation or from the other person, and then ask a really specific question about it. In that meeting, when I didn't come to that meeting, I was really concerned that you might feel that I abandoned you. Did that come up for you? Yes, no? What did come up for you instead if it wasn't that? I'd love to know exactly what you were thinking when I canceled that meeting, but asking about things that are really specific and that we genuinely want to know about, that is how we normalize all types of feedback, make it safe for someone to say, actually, yeah, I was really frustrated in that moment. Instead of sort of this, do you have feedback for me? Where someone really, the options are yes or no. And what are the odds they're really gonna take a huge risk and give you, something that they've been holding on to for weeks and weeks. This same thing applies. Start small, build trust, and kind of build up from there. But it's all rooted. Again, I really had to learn this the hard way, my own experience as a manager, in what can I get curious about? And how do I go and ask that question? And then even if I don't like the answer, stay in that place of curiosity. Just seek to understand where this person's coming from and what they're telling me.
Yeah, it's so powerful because we naturally want to go away from the discomfort. And when we get curious, we're going to get feedback that is not going to make us feel great.
Yep.
But to really move forward, right, Annie? Like to really actually connect with somebody and find out the information that we need, we have to be willing to put that emotion aside, that fear aside, and just get the feedback. And I love the idea of being specific around it. Just like, what did you think about that? That won't work. So I love that we harness on that piece. And so we're almost at time here. And I just, first off, your manager training, your course, we're going to put it in the show notes. So for anyone out there that's listening to this who kind of would love to go deeper with Annie, she's doing the real work here. She's really helping to improve the interpersonal professional dynamics of people like within companies specifically, and also in startups really as well. Like really focused on that piece. But I think your work is very universal. I would take your course. And I also want to acknowledge your podcast as well. And we'll also put that in there because that would be really fascinating. You're just really engaging and magnetic and you speak to this really clearly. And I think that comes from really having done the true work yourself. Like that's why I love going into your story because it's not just something that you learned in a book. You went through it yourself. And the goal then is to then be able to share your framework and your ideas in a way where others can take that wisdom and don't have to go through the same amount of pain to be able to get the solution, right? So I think you're really embodying that. And so just really grateful that you're here. And the last piece I'll share is for those in our membership, you can stay on the call a little bit. And if you have any questions for Annie directly, we can open it up for some questions and interaction. I think she's agreed to stay 10 minutes, but officially, I want to thank you, and you're awesome.
Thank you.
Lauren has something to share as well, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. It's so helpful. And people often think their craft is physician or startup founder, but really life is the craft, right? Like you get really good at life and these like human skills, and then everything is way easier and falls into place. And
totally. I remember you saying that to me once, Lauren, life is the craft. And I have to say I was uncomfy when you said that. And it's all just part of, I think I'm on the journey with everybody here. And so if anybody wants to connect about any of the topics we discussed today, I would be thrilled to. And I just so appreciate you having me on to talk about these things.